welcome back. Hey, I haven't been around for about 5 or 6 months. You know how life just gets crazy sometimes, and that's kind of what's happened to me. I had some things I needed to take care of, so I had to step back for a little bit. But one of the things I've been doing is, for those of you who have watched some of my previous videos, you might know that I was working on renovating my kitchen. And I do my renovations all on my own. Well, in the process of working on my kitchen, I wound up with one of the craziest things I've ever done to save money. And it worked. So now I'm not telling anybody else out there to do this. I'm not saying this is the way it should be done. This is how I solved a problem that I had. And if you want to try it, that's up to you. One of the things when I'm working on my home renovations is I have very old saws, old equipment. I don't necessarily have what I should to do the job I'm doing. So sometimes I just have to make do, and that is why I do not film myself while I'm doing these projects, because I do not want to encourage somebody to do things that may not be safe for them to do. I try to be very careful when I'm doing things. I know what chances I'm taking, but I'm not going to encourage other people to do things that maybe they shouldn't do. But since I don't always have what I need to do the job, I make do. Anyway, to get to the point, I was told by just about everybody I knew that what I was doing was not something I should be doing, that it wouldn't work. But I was in a situation where I needed to renovate my kitchen for a lot of different reasons. There were a lot of things that had been done in my home when it was modernized back in the late 70s, early 80s. The previous owners had modernized the house, and in order to do that, they did the typical trick that was done during that time period, where you actually had companies that would, advertise that they had like a 1 or 2 day renovation for your home, and they would come in and they would put up paneling on all the walls. And then they would put suspended ceilings in. Well, what they didn't tell people was that in order for them to run new wiring and do some of the other things that needed to be done in the homes, they actually just busted big holes in the plaster walls, pulled the wires through and ran wires in all different directions all over. And then they put a suspended ceiling in. Once they put the paneling up on the walls, the homeowners couldn't tell what had been done behind. Well, that was the case in this house. There were, holes that were like big holes in the walls. And this is a 1925 house, so it had the old lath and plaster walls, so they just busted all these big, ugly holes in the walls, put up their paneling, dropped the ceiling down, walked out and forgot about it. Well, all the kitchens, they put bulkheads in them, and all that did was invite rodents, mice to come up the walls through the holes, and literally, you could hear them running around on top of the suspended ceiling. They got in the bulkheads and made a mess in there. So it was quite the adventure getting all that torn out, cleaned up, the walls repaired, and the kitchen finished up. Well, this, I'm sure most of you know, your kitchen is probably going to be your most expensive renovation. To be honest, I did not really have tens of thousands of dollars to put in this kitchen renovation, but something had to be done. I had a really big mouse problem, and I had gotten pretty much through the rest of my house and gotten a lot of these things repaired and so on. So the kitchen was left. I did not want to pull out the amount of money it was going to take to put in all like brand new cabinets. Well, my mind got to working, and I thought, I really don't want to pull all that money out of savings to do this. Cabinets all have to go. They were a whole nother story in and of themselves. But one thing I did think about was I had a big stack of plywood. Now, this was not cabinet grade plywood, and this was not 3/4 inch ply, which is what I prefer to use to build cabinets. It was 1/4 inch, and I thought, 3/4 inch pieces of plywood makes a 3/4 inch if you glue them together. And everybody kept telling me, no, you can't do that. And I'm sure if there's woodworkers out there watching, they're just going to be aghast at what I've done here. And that's okay, because it's not in their kitchen, it's in my kitchen. So what I did was I actually took these smaller pieces of 1/4 inch ply and I laminated 3/4 inch pieces of ply together. I glued them, I clamped them, and I weighted them. And I left them weighted for 2 or 3 days so that the glue would have time to adhere and really stick. So once I had all these 1/4 inch pieces of ply laminated, then I took them to the table saw and I sawed them into the size of pieces I needed to build my cabinets. Now, keep in mind, when I decided to do this, I was not looking to do this gorgeous custom kitchen that you would see in magazines. I live in the real world, and I live on a very low income. I had to be able to do what I could afford to do. If you're looking for a spread out of Architectural Digest, you're in the wrong place here. This is what I was able to do in order to build cabinets for my kitchen. My kitchen in a 1925 cottage. I wasn't looking to put modern cabinets in. So what I did was I built my kitchen cabinets very similar to what you would have seen in the 19-teens, the 1920s. And I built them the size I had scrap plywood. So you're not going to necessarily see something that looks just like something you would go buy. And I will show you a little bit of video of my cabinets, but I had a lot of people making fun of me. Now my cabinets have been, the wall cabinets have been up for probably just right at about 5 or 6 months. I've had them hanging. I've had no abnormal warping. I've had, I mean, they're hanging right there on the walls. Base cabinets, the same thing. I built them with, I built the cabinets all open, like similar to a European front cabinet. because I like a cabinet that I can open up, I can put large items in, and I'm not having to wiggle them here and there and so on. The cabinets that were in here before had kind of abnormally small openings. They were all small boxes, and it's just a pain. If you've got larger items to store, it's just a pain. You can't even put a large plate in them. They're made for little itty bitty plates and so on. Well, I built my cabinets. There were only two things that designated what size they were going to be, and that was how big do they have to be to hold the stuff I have, and how big are the pieces of plywood I have. So it took me several months to get everything laminated, cut, and all my cabinet boxes put together and assembled. And then I made very, very simple doors. But this is not necessarily to tell you to do this in your kitchen. This is more about what can you do if you don't have what you need. And this is kind of a theme in my life because I've never had money to throw away. I mean, when somebody tells me it costs $50,000 to do a kitchen renovation, I'm looking at them like they've got three heads because I cannot understand spending so much money to do things. And granted, not everybody's going to like what I did. Not everybody's going to think it looks good. I'm not asking you to let me do your kitchen. I'm just showing you what I did in order to save money. And basically what I did was I took what was left, which would have been maybe half. A few years ago, I bought a big stack of 1/4-inch ply for about $30. These were pieces of 1/4-inch ply that had been used to hold parts on racks for a local manufacturing company. And rather than ship these pieces of ply back to the supplier, they just donated them to a resale shop. You know, one of the kind of a Habitat for Humanity resale shop. And that's where I got them. So I bought this big stack. Now, you're limited. Some of the pieces were almost half sheets of ply, but most of the pieces were a little smaller than that. I did have enough to do the base cabinets in the almost half sheet ply, so I could make them, you know, standard depth and so on like that. The upper cabinets I used the smaller pieces for, and it took time. It took a lot of time to cut all these pieces down because I was not using the proper table saw. I was using a table saw that was actually too small for what I was doing. But once I got all the pieces laminated, then I could cut them down. And then I built my boxes from that point. Then I wound up, for the doors, I actually did have to purchase some lumber to make my doors. But I probably out of the stack of plywood I purchased for $30, I had probably half of that left. I had used half of it for something else, and I had about half of that left. So for about $15, even if you want to go up and say $20, I was able to build all the boxes for my cabinets. Now, I did have to go and buy some lumber to trim them out, and I bought some lumber to build the doors out of. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of video. You may see a handle missing here or there. You may see something that's not quite finished. I've still got some small things I need to finish up in my kitchen. I've got some painting I need to do and so on. But the point of this video is basically to show you just what you can do when you think you don't have what you need. Now, this kitchen has basically been built with nothing but scraps, leftovers. Countertop can be expensive. So I went through all the leftover pieces of tile that I've had over different projects in different houses that I've renovated over the years. Some of this tile is probably 30 years old. And I took the tile and I made myself a tiled countertop. And I was going to do it like some of the new, I mean, there's some really pretty tiled countertops out there, and they have all the metal around the edges and all that. And I went and I priced that stuff. And let me tell you, that is expensive. I mean, I looked at that and I thought, good heavens, you can actually wind up with as much money in this trim as it takes to put in all new cabinets. And I thought, I'm not doing that. So I trimmed my countertops out with wood trim, wood moldings and things like that. So I did it very old school. I did it very much like countertops and cabinets would have been done during the era my house was built. And I really spent very little money to do it. So this is a kitchen that is not meant to be a showpiece. This is a working kitchen for a woman who uses her kitchen, and done in a way that I could afford to do it. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But this is more just to encourage you to look at what you have, what you need to do, and use what you have to do it. Like I said, not everybody would be interested in doing this particular project the way I did it, but this is just an example to encourage you to do something with what you have and not to be discouraged if you're running a little lower on money than what you need. There's always a way to figure something out, and I just encourage you to do that. Well, come back and see me, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.